So I am a psychologist too, and I'm a professor of psychology and public mental health at the University of Liverpool. And what I'm going to be doing today is trying to present an overview of the Community Wellbeing Evidence Programme and also looking at some of the best bits. So you'll notice that I'm going to shift the window a little bit here by talking about a concept that we're developing called community wellbeing, which is, you'll see, different to individual wellbeing. This is our consortium. It's broad, 5 universities and importantly 5 civil society partners as well, who we've worked with throughout the programme and who've helped us to stay grounded and keep to the important topics and to translate our outputs efficiently. So our task when we came in was really twofold. We wanted to generate theory and evidence to understand what works to create community well-being and or well-being in places, because we were very interested in community of place, so that we could recommend and improve interventions at the place-based level. And then 2, we wanted to provide policymakers and practitioners with state-of-the-research evidence to help them to allocate resources to best effect. Now, that's been one of our biggest challenges in the programme, I think. I'm not going to talk much about challenges, although I do have a slide, because we have the challenges panel coming up. And my colleague Anne-Marie is going to do a much better job than I could on the challenges of the programme as we saw it. While we did this work, we developed very early on, through our collaborative process, a framework that has endured throughout the programme, which is around 3 things: people, place and power, and the interaction of those 3 things and what that means for developing well-being in our communities. So here's that challenges slide. I just want to point out the fact again that doing any analysis on cost effectiveness was really, really difficult for us. The state of the evidence is not conducive to that kind of analysis. We've done a few bits, but not very much. So that's a real challenge, I think, going forward in this particular area. Many others too, which, as I say, Anne-Marie will be covering. But solutions, so how we were going to tackle this idea of community wellbeing and getting understanding around what that means and how it relates to individual well-being and other kinds of concepts that overlap with it: social capital, social well-being, attachment to place, and so on. So, as Christina was saying, we had a very in-depth collaborative development stage, 6 months worth, and we produced a Voice of the User report. Other solutions that we knew we were going to have to take from the outset was that because communities engage everyone and engage multiple disciplines and multiple sectors, we were going to have to go at this from a very, very cross-disciplinary point of view, from a very cross-sector point of view, and to try to produce integrated outputs from that perspective, and also iterative products. And while doing all that, we were very clear that what we didn't want to do was to lose sight of the complexity of what we were dealing with. Policy can sometimes fail for being too simplistic, and we really wanted to avoid giving evidence to policymakers that was over simple. This is a fantastic diagram from the Foresight Mental Capital and Wellbeing Project, and I think it illustrates the complexity of well-being and how we understand it, but from the point of view of community well-being, the overlay of all those factors that we need to consider when we think about communities and their well-being is very well acknowledged in this diagram. So the audience then, really important for a What Works Centre. Who are we talking to? Who are we directing our evidence to? And I think it's fair to say that the topic of community must involve everyone. So hence the very broad audience reflected on this slide. But within that audience, there are sectors who can sometimes have very entrenched views. There are particular disciplines that perhaps undervalue different kinds of evidence. And so we knew that part of the work that we were doing would have to be to change minds and to win hearts around this whole concept of community wellbeing. So onto the Voice of the User report. So this is the collaborative development phase of the work, and these were the questions that we were interested in hearing the voice of our users about. So, establishing consensus definitions. What do we mean by this concept? How is it meaningful to describe it? And what's important to look at? What are the important research topics that you would like to have research on, synthesized about? And then what are the barriers to using that research? Really important question, because we know that that evidence is not used as well as it sometimes can be, and that's got something to do with the kind of outputs that people, particularly academics, are producing. So we engaged nationally. Important to say that it was a very broad set of engagements using different kind of methods to do so. And also important to emphasize that we continue to engage through our program. Most importantly, I want to emphasize here the fact that we've held public hearings of our evidence on the well-being, for example, of the most vulnerable, and also on local delivery systems. These were incredibly rich and powerful events that really helped us to elaborate the concepts that we were working with. And on definitions then, again, this is the consensus definition. This is how we try to establish it through our survey in the collaborative development phase. So we asked practitioners, professionals, policy makers who worked in the area of well-being and of community well-being what they understood community well-being was. And you'll see from this graph that it's clearly a very layered concept, and some of those layers reflect the kind of sectors that people are working in, no doubt. But you see a very clear front runner. So community well-being is something about developing strong networks of people in the communities in which they live. So that was a clear front runner, but you can see on the slide the other things that people endorsed as well. But there's a need for flexible definitions. Academics often get really hung up about definitions, psychology is particular, but we need to be flexible in relation to the definitions that we use. So depending on the context, we can sometimes use very formal definitions like Wiseman and Brasher's here on the slide, and also more philosophical ideas, for example, such as we-ness, which takes community to be like family. We know we've got well-being in our community when it operates like a close family. This slide, I think, is really important because it illustrates, again taken from the survey, it illustrates the importance of place to community and to community well-being. And these examples were derived when we asked our survey respondents to tell us of an example that they knew about that showed good community well-being. And in these examples on here and across the others, there were several of them, people talked about reclaiming the public realm. Making the place their own was very, very important in this narrative. So again, through the collaboration phase, we were able to identify the review topics that we thought people wanted, the people told us they wanted evidence on. And those review topics were around housing, around improving social relations, around community co-production, and around heritage and its effect on well-being. So for all of those topics, we produced broad scoping reviews so that we could illustrate the state of the wider literature, both grey and academic literature. And for the top three, we followed those scoping reviews up with systematic reviews which asked specific questions around key matters of concern. So for housing, the systematic review question was, what housing policies work best to improve the well-being of the most vulnerable? For social relations, we asked the question, what community infrastructure, spaces and places, interventions work to improve community well-being? And for community co-production, we asked, do joint decision-making initiatives in communities lead to improved individual and or community well-being? Because surprisingly, there's really not much literature on that. And as I said, heritage we looked at in relation to a broad scope of the evidence, and I'll come back to that shortly. So all of the reports that we've published so far are on the What Works Centre website here, and we've got two outstanding. The last two on the list will be coming out in the following months. So do look at them. So underpinning all of that review work, we did a lot of conceptual work to try to improve our understanding of the concept, of the theories behind it, and linking that to how we measure and understand community well-being. And this is the work of our programme very early on, a nascent theory of change, which we will hopefully build as evidence gathers around this particular concept. So this shows how we expect change to happen in communities to community well-being as a result of specific interventions. And alongside that, we produced a conceptual review of community well-being to try to organise this complexity that I showed you on the diagram earlier, and also a scoping review of indicators or measures of community well-being or related concepts such as social capital. What are the widely used measures so far? So what I'm going to do now is try to show you what I think is a good selection of the Community Wellbeing Evidence Programme's best bits. Now obviously this is subjective. We've done a load of work and there are so many best bits, but these are my best bits. It's one of the benefits of talking, you get to show your own best bits. So I haven't mentioned the work we've done on secondary data analysis yet, but we did some, and our focus really on secondary data analysis were on two questions. Wellbeing inequalities and its drivers in the UK, what can we understand about that and about the spatial representation of those inequalities, which has been touched on already, and changes in wellbeing related to community conditions over time. We have one secondary data analysis report still to deliver on that, but it will be coming out again in the following months. And some of the take-home messages from that those secondary data analyses are that inequalities in well-being exist at an area level, as we might expect. They are related to education and also to ethnicity. Nothing surprising there, I think we knew all that, but we can show it. In relation to places, Blaenau Gwent, in the valleys of Wales, and Liverpool, where I happen to live, are amongst the most unequal for well-being. Enfield and Cheshire East are amongst the most equal. And that is a pattern that seems to exist across different survey timescales. So these are enduring and they need to change. They clearly overlap with other inequalities too, and I think that's important to acknowledge. There has been, it seems, a trend of declining well-being inequalities over time, which is good to hear, but how that's represented spatially is something that we need to dig under a little bit more. Importantly, higher levels of education do not always translate into better well-being. I think we probably all know that. With responsibility comes stress and so on. And Kevin's just talked a little bit about that. Wellbeing inequalities are linked to voting behaviour. This was some analysis that was done by NEF, one of our partners, who looked at the wellbeing inequalities spatial map and how people voted on Brexit. And I'm sure you'll be able to anticipate what was seen. Wellbeing and its change over time is robustly related to community conditions, even after controlling for individual differences in things like mental health and family factors. So there is something very important going on at the level of place that's beyond individual. And finally, wellbeing inequalities do seem to be, according to these surveys, amenable to well-designed and targeted interventions, but the evidence in the surveys is limited by what's actually been measured so far. So they're not real answers, they're just a representation of what we know following what's been put into the survey. So lots of best bits from the secondary data analysis. What about housing and well-being? Well, our scoping review identified that physical infrastructure is the only area which has really high quality evidence about wellbeing outcomes in relation to housing. The systematic review, which again focused on vulnerable people and what the best policy was, identified housing first as the best policy and practice in terms of improving well-being in the most vulnerable in our society. And that is partly because housing first has been explored the most. And we were able to do a cost effectiveness analysis on housing and housing first. And while clearly it seems to be evidence-based in terms of its efficacy in improving well-being, this analysis showed that it is a costly approach, as you'd expect, and it doesn't seem to translate in terms of savings. I don't know where that leaves us, but there we are. So on to the community infrastructure, the places and spaces work. I won't go into in any depth on this because, of course, you can read the briefing report, which is out there. But one of the key things about this piece of work was the massive breadth of it. It was an absolutely enormous review. It was a systematic review. And it was huge because there were so many different interventions that had to be looked at, place-based interventions that had to be looked at. So one of our key tasks in doing this was to try to understand which interventions did what the best. So outcome mapping in relation to interventions. And you can see from this simple table here, which only looks at 3 types of interventions, that there is some indication that there are specific things going on for specific interventions. So, for example, if we want to improve our networks, Community Hub is very good to do that. And also, if people want to improve their skills and knowledge, you can do that through a Community Hub really quite well. Events seem to be very good at engaging people around heritage and culture. I think no surprise there. I think we probably knew that. And public realm design seems to be pretty good in making people feel safer in the places that they live. And also, it seemed to be the intervention of choice to pick up the local economy. So some indications there as we sifted through the evidence in this kind of way. And this was translated into the briefing document in this fantastically beautiful and very colourful but extremely complicated diagram which really captures the breadth of this review. But it is all about this outcome mapping, understanding what does what the best. And the other image is a summary of what we found with a very simple cost effectiveness analysis associated with it. So on joint decision making, we were really very interested, only really interested, in meaningful involvement of local people in decisions that protect, maintain, or enhance the material and social conditions in which they live. By meaningful, I mean the top 3 rungs here of Sherry Arnstein's very long-lasting and very widely known ladder of participation. So, partnership working, proper partnership working as the minimum. We tried to locate the evidence around that meaningful level of joint decision making. And what that meant, of course, was that we found really quite few studies that did that, especially when we asked them to trace back to wellbeing outcomes. 29 studies synthesized on that. And what we found was evidence of beneficial impacts for people involved in joint decision making in their communities, and also, and probably more importantly, benefits for the wider community of people being involved. And I think that's really important. What I should have said in a previous slide was that in our Spaces and Places review, there was no evidence whatsoever that top-down regeneration initiatives translated into wellbeing benefits for communities at all. Okay? It's only when people participated in them that you got that translation happening, according to the evidence so far. So lots of improvements to well-being related outcomes for people, both those involved and the wider community, but also, importantly, adverse impacts. And Christina pointed out the importance of recognising adverse impacts. And again, these probably aren't surprising. For any social activists in the audience, you always see adverse outcomes associated with this kind of working. On the heritage scoping review, we're working on this currently, so it's work currently going on. And while there's plenty of evidence to show that being in heritage places and participating in heritage-based interventions does improve outcomes associated with well-being and community well-being, the evidence is very variable in quality, and there are real issues about inclusion in this sort of work. So real health and well-being inequality issues. What's really of note here, and I'm going to have to go quite quickly now, is the number of outcomes that this set of evidence looked at, 180 or more. So what we've been trying to do is to thematize those outcomes in a way that tries to holistically understand in one diagram what community well-being actually means. And this is going to be the focus of any future work that we manage to do. So we've been developing an ecological model, a community well-being tree, which is a concept visualization, but also potentially an intervention and measurement tool. So in the tree, we have branches, and those branches represent the domains of community well-being, so mental, social capital, physical capital, economic capital, and environmental capital. All of those things are important for communities. And the leaves and the twigs represent outcomes and represent particular interventions. What's important here is to understand that the tree is the community, it's connected through its root system to other communities, to the forest of community well-being. And clouds and rain are the macro determinants that affect the way the thriving of that particular tree or community. So that's work in progress. Another go at the concept of community well-being. So in summary then, the Community Wellbeing Evidence Programme has found, honestly, more gaps than evidence. So we need more primary research in this area, and we need primary research that's conceptually and theoretically underpinned and of better quality. Evidence of interventions typically don't convincingly, if at all, track through to well-being, and certainly not to community well-being. The evidence tends to be, which does do that, tends to be typically of medium or low quality. And there are an enormous amount of outcomes related to well-being and community well-being, which need to be rationalised in order to make this conceptually clearer. And in work hopefully still to come, we'll be exploring this whole conceptual development and trying to bring it together in a way that can inform better measurement and better evaluation in the future. We hope to be conducting some spatial mapping to look at issues like transport, so the functionality of places and the way that they move, and how that relates to the well-being of the people that live there and of the communities that exist within those places. And some more systematic reviews or reviews of more grounded evidence looking at the effect that community businesses and community projects can actually have in lifting up the well-being of the community. And thank you everybody for listening.